I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Industry Updates. As usual, this is a quick-fire session, so each of our speakers has 5 minutes in which to introduce either their new product, their new initiative, or standard. So we'll dive straight in as time is tight on these sorts of sessions. So I'm very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Simon Holt, who's publisher and co-chair of Elsevier Enabled at Elsevier, and he's providing an update on the European Accessibility Act.
Okay. All right. Ready?
Yep.
Hi, everybody. So, as Louise said, my name is Simon, and I lead content accessibility efforts at Elsevier. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about the European Accessibility Act, which is a major piece of European legislation covering book publishing and e-commerce solutions on books sold within the European Union. Next slide, please. So the EAA comes into force on the 28th of June 2025, and it covers all books, e-commerce solutions for any book sold within the European Union. The main thing to say is that the legislation is about books sold rather than books published, so it covers backlist titles as well as frontlist titles. Next slide, please. So why is this important? Well, as some of you might know, who've seen me walking around with my cane, I'm a visually impaired person, and therefore accessibility is really important to me. This is the difference between people being able to read and not read. And as publishers, our job is to curate, enrich, and disseminate content. And if people can't read our content, then we're not really doing our job. About 15% of the world's working age population has a disability. And as you can see on this slide, we're not just talking about vision impaired people, but we're talking about hearing impaired people, dyslexic people, dyspraxic people, etc. So actually, in terms of our mission as a publishing industry, this act is really important for us in terms of fulfilling what it is that we really get up every day to be able to do. Next slide, please. So what if we don't bother with this? What if we just say, okay, this is another piece of legislation, maybe it's not that important, maybe we're not going to do it? Well, the reality is that there could be quite serious consequences. And actually, lawyers who've looked into this are comparing this act to GDPR in terms of size. There are fines of up to €100,000 per violation. So that means, for example, if you have 3 images that don't have image descriptions, you could be fined €300,000, so a lot of money. But also, aggregators like EBSCO and VitalSource are saying that they may not publish your books if they don't conform to European Accessibility Act standards. So therefore, we really do need to be taking this seriously. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges? So for Elsevier, and obviously that's who I work for, the challenges are volume 1, right? We publish a lot of content, right? At the moment, as I said, the European Accessibility Act is about books, but it's likely that more legislation is going to come in Europe and in the US and elsewhere that is going to cover journals as well. Like data privacy, this is not a one and done kind of situation. So for us, it's about volume. For other people, it might be about resources, or it might be about the kinds of content that they're publishing, right? And so therefore, for each organization, it's important to think about where are the challenges for you. Next slide, please. So how do we tackle this? So what I've put here, and I'm sure you'll be able to look at the slides afterwards, is a bit of a checklist that we've come up with, right? So my focus is really on the right-hand column, which is about content accessibility. So talking about image descriptions for images, captions and transcripts for videos, published in accessible formats like EPUBs and tagged PDFs, and also providing the right metadata so that if a user like me wants to buy a book, then we can make an informed decision based on whether that book is accessible. But we can see with the other columns, we're talking about things like platforms and products here as well. So it's about books, but it's also about the platforms on which you publish as well. And it's really important that you guys are talking to your teams to make sure that you have the latest accessibility audits, that you have a VPAT and you're documenting those, because there are reporting requirements around the European Accessibility Act. And if you feel that there are exceptions, there's a disproportionate burden clause, for example. If you feel there are exceptions that don't need to be made accessible, you need to log those with the relevant authorities in each country. So really, making sure you're carrying out the work and documenting that properly is pretty important. Next slide, please. So finally, I wanted just to finish by just thinking about some considerations that we're thinking about here, right? So, how can AI help? Well, AI is great. But it's not the solution in itself, right? AI is great for, say, a first draft of an image description, but as publishers, we care about quality. And I think we'd all agree that we wouldn't publish anything just through AI without really having it checked by a human being first. What about authors? Where can they come in? Well, there are kind of two schools of thought on this, right? Some people say, well, the authors should write the image descriptions themselves, for example. Other people like me say, actually, we should get suppliers to provide these and the authors to check it. My feeling here is, having worked in editorial for many years in the past, getting a manuscript out of an author is not easy. Asking them to write 200, 300, 400 image descriptions on top of what they already do doesn't seem a great way to stick to a publishing schedule to me. I think we should also say that writing image descriptions is technical writing, right? So I'd say the Venn diagram of authors who are able to do this and willing to do this is quite slim. Actually, author value comes in validating what's put in front of them to say, yes, this makes sense. Yes, this is accurate, complete, and relevant. So really think, when you're thinking about this, where can we get the most value by engaging with the author in the workflow? And then finally, I mentioned right at the beginning, backlist. What about titles that have been published in the past? Well, clearly this is about books sold. And clearly, therefore, what we need to do is prioritize those titles that have been sold the most, so therefore are likely to be sold again. I think every publisher is taking a slightly different approach to this. What we're doing is prioritizing the most used titles, the titles that have been published most recently, and then we're going to have an on-demand service for the rest. I'm happy to talk about a bit more about how that might work if you want to find me after the session. So to conclude, the European Accessibility Act is an important and transformative piece of legislation. It's going to make books available for the first time to millions of people with disabilities. This is really exciting. It can help us as publishers leverage AI, but it is an important and weighty piece of legislation, and therefore it needs to be considered with due care in order that you're compliant, therefore don't get fined, and therefore can continue to publish your works. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Simon. We're sticking with a similar theme for our second presentation. Stephen Laverick, Director at Green 15 Publishing Consultancy and Senior Associate at Maverick Publishing Specialist, is going to talk about JATS 4R, an ISO recommended practice on accessibility. Thank you.
Okay, so JATS for Reuse, or JATS 4R, is an initiative that was launched in 2014 in response to a paper presented at JATSCon that year entitled Inconsistent XML as a Barrier to the Reuse of Open Access Content. The great strength of JATS XML is its flexibility and its ability to cover such a wide-ranging array of article types and subject matter. Unfortunately, its greatest weakness is its flexibility and its ability to cover such a wide-ranging array of article types and subject matter. If you give 10 different XML developers the same article content and ask them to tag it using JATS, then you'll likely get 10 differently tagged JATS files. Whilst the tagging documentation provided with JATS is extremely useful, it very much defines what you can and can't do, not necessarily how you should do it. This is where JATS 4R comes in. JATS 4R is about optimizing the reusability of scholarly content by developing best practice recommendations for tagging content in JATS XML. Following that plea at JATSCon, a group of OA publishers and interested parties formed JATS 4R in the summer of 2014. In 2018, we joined NISO as a recommended practice in an attempt to gain greater visibility, an area in which we'd previously struggled. We'd published plenty of recommendations and have tools to test compliance, but not many people were aware of them. This also gave us access to a wider community, volunteers, and the ability to take our lead from their feedback and discussions around which areas needed addressing. This led to the formation of an accessibility working group in the summer of 2022, with myself and Jeff Beck as co-chairs and a strong group of industry experts across different areas. With this group in place, we set about putting together a roadmap for the various topics that we were going to include. We were approaching this very much from a technical point of view and making the assumption that people already had this accessible content and needed help in tagging it. We didn't want to get involved in editorial policy or workflow suggestions. A lot of it seemed relatively straightforward at first. For example, most people know what alt text is and can agree that it's a cornerstone of accessibility. There's even a JATS tag ready-made for alt text. But when we started to dig into this further, we realized that we were going to have to stray into the editorial side of things as well. How was the alt text being created? Is it coming from authors? Is it coming from editorial, vendors, or even AI? We felt that this information was important and needed capturing, particularly in the instance of AI, where the tools are not that great at the moment. And in the future, you may need to identify where alt text has been created using AI, so you can go back and revisit that as tools evolve. Other areas where this crossover between editorial and technical occurred included tables. Most importantly, the tables should be handled as XHTML and definitely not as images. But also for accessibility purposes, your tables need to have a table header. I've seen many instances of tables which didn't have a header, things that probably shouldn't actually have been a table at all. This needs editorial enforcement to ensure that the relevant content is there in order for it to be tagged correctly. For links, the technical aspect is very simple. There are tags for that, whether you're talking about internal or external linking. But wrapping those links around text, which will indicate what the text is about, rather than just read more, was something that we felt needed to be given greater visibility as well. Likewise, if you're linking out to an external URL, you should have a description of what the reader can expect to find when clicking on that URL. You should also take care to ensure that the link area is large enough. For example, if you're talking about footnotes or references, then it may just be a single character, which, when it's been rendered in a PDF, for example, can be difficult to click on. For audio and video items, you should have a transcript ideally, but how should that transcript be handled, depending as to whether it's contained within the article XML or if it lives externally to the article. For headings and lists, essentially make sure that there's a proper hierarchy for these and that they're correctly nested. I once worked with a publisher who had a portfolio of 20 or so journals, all of which were supposed to follow the same style, but one of the managing editors didn't like the heading 2 style, so it was never used in that journal. He just used to go straight from heading 1 to a heading 3. When it comes to accessibility, you can't do that kind of thing. Each section should have a heading, and for lists, where possible, you should stick to standard ordered or unordered lists. Earlier this year, our recommendations were published, including a bunch of other topics that we covered that we don't have time to go into right now. So members of the Accessibility Working Group are working on a follow-up to these recommendations, further examining their practical applications. Please feel free to go to the website, look through the accessibility recommendation in more depth, as well as all of the other recommendations we've got up there. We also have a LinkedIn group and are on Twitter if you want to keep up to date with what we're working on. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Our next speaker is Sam Parker, Senior Product Manager at Wiley, who's talking about Wiley's paper mill detection tool.
Cool. Hi, so I'm Sam. Thanks a bunch for letting me come up here for a little bit. Just a really quick introduction. So I'm the Senior Product Manager at Wiley Partner Solutions. I'm here to talk really briefly about RI. The catch is, though, that I want to talk to you about some real-life takeaways from actually building real platforms to manage real journals and how we're using that process to reorientate and pivot portfolios from being reactive to proactive about RI. So the first slide here, I kind of wanted to encapsulate a little what I class as a highly reactive publisher in relation to RI. On paper, it's pretty scary. It's a terrifying prospect. Think kind of whack-a-mole investigations with tip-offs, sleuths turning up at your door, and the end result here is really uncertainty, anxiety, something at some point will go downhill. I use the word vulnerable in this, which feels a bit like hyperbole, but it's kind of true. I've felt it. It's something many people in this room feel. I've definitely felt that. So publishers with even the slightest concern around RI need to shift from being reactive to proactive. And it takes time, and it's really a long, ongoing process. Putting on a product hat, a proactive approach here empowers publishers, funders, institutions, to be honest, the wider world, to elevate standards, grow trust, continuously innovate, and also focus on more than the journal article. So instead, we really need to normalize looking at a paper and its surrounding artifacts as a breadcrumb trail, like that trail that you follow. You tease out inconsistencies before they become problems. What that results in is something that looks a little bit like this, and this is really optimistic. I've used a lot of green on it. A proactive solution should offer pinpointed detection, early warning systems, centralized data that's integrated into workflows so you can catch things quick. All of these nice green things alleviate the anxiety that I spoke about, so they mitigate that risk. So I wanted to talk to you about what a move like this looks like and what we've learned from it. It's in 4 steps. There's that move again on the left from reactive to proactive. And first step is that mitigation of risk. We're vulnerable, we recognize risk, we feel like we could be in trouble. Next is then making those data points explainable and building narratives from them. That's kind of a key piece here. And then from that, it's that process of continually improving, which honestly, I think is that main piece. Setting in motion those loops leads us to a final proactive space where we can actually horizon scan well and respond to things quickly, which is all really nice in theory. It's really easy to put on a board, but operationalizing these things is another nightmare. So we built a platform for that. Some of you have already heard of this, but for those that haven't, we have a modular peer review platform suite called Research Exchange. And my focus for the last 3 years has been building the RO module of this, which we call Research Exchange Screening. As it moves. It's a real thing. We have over 340 journals on this platform. We use it literally every day on all content. And we use it to break these data points and all of these tells into workflow-friendly, contextualized data points that users can use pre, mid, post peer review. They can pause things, escalate them, get them in front of subject matter experts. It's a one-stop shop for that investigation thing. And in doing this, we've learned, unsurprisingly, that data is the key that unlocks all of this complexity. Like clean, harmonized data is so useful. You get it in one space as a journal, and you can enable healthy, useful analysis. Multiple data points are good, but crucially, the right multiple data points. Like, if you've got those right ones, you can pinpoint potential risks better. And when you know what those points are, great. But it's not enough to raise warnings. You need to put clear, contextualized data points in front of people so that when they say to an author, hey, what's up with your paper, they can actually say it with confidence and back it up. We don't want a tool that makes decisions for people. We want tools that empower individuals to make better decisions. So all of this means we get those feedback loops. You get data, you can see what's happening across journals. Let's say you see signs of suspicious peer review activity from the same person across 3 different journal submissions in 1 week. You can flag that and investigate it. You can see tortured phrases rising and catch that because you recognize it early on in the peer review process before it's even being reviewed. That's all actionable evidence. And to be clear, all of these data points tell us a lot, but they don't point necessarily to research misconduct or paper mill activity. Like instead, we're surfacing inconsistencies, flaws, tells in submissions, things that might not be obvious at first glance. Reference analysis is my favorite example of this dynamic because one warning can open up loads of different routes. Gen AI, for instance, loves to Frankenstein references, make them up, add dupes. You can tease that out really quickly. If you had an editorial assistant doing this, it might take about half an hour. We do this in about 30 seconds. Which leads to this final slide, which looks incredibly green on my monitor, sorry. All of these things we automatically screen for, but by exposing them, we're not only catching RI concerns and paper mills or AI-generated content, but it's also all a sign of low-quality content too. So you're catching these things, but if any of these alarms are going off, they're things you want to consider there that will help you make quick, concise editorial decisions. That was really quick. I'm really sorry. I hope I made the time. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks very much, George. I'm sorry, I'm about to introduce George. Thank you very much, Sam. Our next speaker is George Cooper, who's Senior Associate Publisher at F1000, who's going to be introducing VeriKive.
Right, thanks very much, Louise. So I'm talking to you today as the Gates Foundation's publishing partner. And as you may know, I'm sure you do know, earlier this year, the Foundation announced a revised open access policy which comes into effect next year, so in January 2025. This is going to include preprint posting for all Gates-funded research outputs, discontinued funding for article processing charges, and support from the Foundation for new open access business models and infrastructure. So to help Gates-funded researchers to comply with this refreshed policy, F1000 has partnered with the Foundation to launch a new verified preprint server called VeriKive. And here it is. It launched on the 31st of July. We've now published the first batch of preprints on the platform with more to follow. Please feel free to explore the platform a bit more whilst I'm talking. So what is a verified preprint server, this term that we keep using? Well, beyond helping Gates grantees to comply with the policy, VeriKive is also intended to raise the trust and integrity standards of preprints in general. So all submitted preprints undergo a series of pre-publication checks to support greater research integrity. And each preprint will also have clear labeling and badging so that readers know what checks have been conducted on the article and which checks have been passed. On this slide, you can see in brief the workflow that's being created for VeriKive, which starts with the publication of a preprint on the platform, followed by peer review on the platform, optional peer review on the platform, then post-review curation in a version of record outlet. So in this sense, it's operating a publish, review, curate model, so 3 distinct stages that authors have the option to engage with to publish their manuscript. The publish part obviously starts with submission, so authors submit their preprint via VeriKive on our single-page submission system with ORCID integration. Then pre-publication checks will be carried out, which I'll come back to in a minute. Once the preprint has passed those checks, assuming it does, a fully typeset version will be published with a DOI. It will then be available in full XML and can now be discovered, viewed, and cited. It will also be automatically indexed in Google Scholar. After publication, authors have got a choice. They can either leave their unreviewed preprint on VeriKive and submit it for review and publication elsewhere, or they can progress to open peer review on the platform with the intention of having their article accepted for final publication in Gates Open Research, which will be the first linked version of record outlet for VeriKive. If authors decide to go down the peer review route, then expert reviewers will be selected and invited by our editorial team, and their reviews and names will be published alongside the VeriKive preprints, together with the authors' responses, so using that open peer review model that you may know from some of the other platforms that we provide. Authors will be encouraged to revise their output based on comments. All those revisions will be linked on the platform, and all reviews will have their own DOI as well, so they can be used and cited. Finally, once a preprint's passed peer review, will be published as a version of record article on Gates Open Research. Over time, our intention is that VeriKive will be linked into other publication venues, and authors will have the option to publish their reviewed manuscript in their venue of choice, hence the curate element here. So last of all, just to share a bit more detail on the types of checks that will be carried out on VeriKive. So there's going to be 4 categories, which you can see here. So we've got, so this will be compulsory for preprint publication, so labeled authorship, publishing ethics, and research integrity. And then the 4th, which is optional, covers open research requirements. It's optional for VeriKive, but it will be required for subsequent peer review and publication on Gates Open Research. So some of these checks, they're already commonplace on some preprint servers, but not all are. As part of these checks, our editorial teams will be delving into the content of submissions a bit more to assess things like author validity, competing interests, third-party permissions, consent requirements, inclusive language, author contributions, and image manipulation. Also, crucially, our open research checks and accompanying badges will give authors the opportunity to demonstrate their commitment to the principles of open research, covering things like reporting guidelines, reproducibility of methods, the availability of data, software and code, and compliance with FAIR standards. So thanks very much for listening. We'd be very happy to talk about linking publications into VeriKive and keen to support greater alignment around ethics badging. So please sign up to our newsletter if you'd like to hear more about that, or come and speak to me. I'd love to talk to you about it. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, George. Our next speaker is Betsy Donoghue, who's Senior Vice President, Business Development at Silverchair. And Betsy's going to be giving us an update from Silverchair's AI Lab.
Thank you. Thanks, Louise. Hi, everybody. Betsy Donoghue, Silverchair. And just in case you're not familiar with Silverchair, this year we launched our AI Lab, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about it today. So Silverchair is the leading independent platform provider in the academic and STM market. We serve a growing community with flexible technology and best-in-class services. We believe that innovation and technology can fulfill the greatest promise of scholarship. And our commitment at Silverchair is to be collaborative, client-led, and a partner to associations, societies, and publishers worldwide. Okay, these days, with technology and everything going on with AI, is happening at breakneck speed. And standing still is the fastest way of moving backwards. So earlier this year, Silverchair formed our AI Lab, dedicating a variety of internal resources, starting with our own education and experimentation. And when I say our own, that means every single Silverchairian understanding AI, using AI, and getting good at it. Over the past several months, we've been sharing what we've been learning with our clients via direct engagement and collaboration and one-on-ones. And then we've been taking their feedback and direction, which allows Silverchair to make a series of informed bets. And these informed bets are really about identifying the real problem that could be solved with AI technology. So, right now, we are in a period of experimentation focusing on 3 main prototypes in particular. First, with dynamic discovery, we're leveraging a RAG approach, which is retrieval augmented generation. This is a process of optimizing the output of a large language model to reference an authoritative knowledge base, a vector database. But this is outside of the data that is training. So what this allows to do is before generating a response, the RAG approach can take from specific walled off content from that publisher. Second is Silverchat, something completely different. But we take the architecture and we put it over all of Silverchair's platform user guides, documentations, FAQs. And that essentially delivers to our clients a personal, interactive platform management expert, really at their fingertips. So that's Silverchat. And finally, our AI-generated summaries, they really are designed to help make highly technical and expert research more accessible by creating simplified and automated plain language explanations. So a little bit more on dynamic discovery. So with dynamic discovery, Silverchair has ensured publisher control is essential. Powered by Silverchair's semantic engine, it features a chatbot interface for a dynamic platform experience for users, while still preserving the value of the version of record for publishers. The content set is controlled by the publisher and comes with cost controls as well. Silverchair's dynamic discovery also uses semantic relationships between the content to drive responses, empowering users to interact with the content in new and interesting ways, and also allows for improvement over time. So what's next then? We'll be expanding on dynamic discovery in particular. And because Silverchair's semantic engine is fully in-house, this allows us to continue upgrading and to continue expanding it while maintaining control over the publisher content. In other words, no data leakage. We believe new opportunities will come up as we build out the engine's capabilities, and as the engine becomes more powerful, we expect new use cases to open up, including recommendation systems, bibliography automation, automatic research review through related content, collection and subject matter visualizations, educational tools, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the latest for a quick update on Silverchair's AI Lab. Thanks for your time and attention.
Thanks very much, Betsy. So on to our penultimate speaker now. I'm pleased to welcome Maria Zalm, who's Senior Editor and Team Manager, Publication Ethics at PLOS. And Maria's going to be talking about NISO's recommended practice on the communication of retractions, removals, and expressions of concern.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you to ALPS for inviting me to talk about the NISO recommended practice on the communication of retractions, removals, and expressions of concern. So why was NISO developed? This recommended practice was developed as a result of retractions, which obviously are a mechanism to correct the scholarly literature to inform readers that information in the article is considered unreliable, either because of misconduct or honest error, or because the study was conducted in an unethical manner, or because it was illegally published. The best practice currently, according to GOAP guidance, is to make sure that retracted articles remain available online, but are clearly marked as retracted. Unfortunately, on the flip side of this, several studies recently have shown that retracted work continues to be cited in an inappropriate manner, where there is no acknowledgement of the retracted status of the affected work. In addition, these studies have also shown that a lot of the inconsistencies in the a lot of the continued citation of the retracted work is due to the inconsistencies in the presentation of the retracted publications. Different publishers across different times have different ways, and as a result, it's not always clear to readers and to data aggregators that an article has been retracted. And so the scholarly community identified a need for consistent, standardized, interoperable, and timely information sharing, and this NISO correct recommended practice has been developed to meet that need. Now, before I talk a little bit more about what NISO Correc is, I want to declare what it's definitely not. So it is not a guidance on making editorial decisions or the process of the editorial decision making. We've already got clear guidance on that from COPE, and that's out of scope for Correc. Instead, Correc provides guidance on how we share this information about post-publication editorial decisions once the editorial decision has been made. So the NISO working group was set up about 3 years ago and had a wide cross-industry representation, including publishers, aggregators, web vendors, libraries, universities, and other representatives. We worked together initially to create the scope of the working group. Then we reviewed existing practices, which was quite a shock to a lot of publishers when they realized how much inconsistency there was within their own publishing houses. And then we drafted recommended practices for best practices to go forward. As we were drafting these recommended practices, they are encouraging people to share clear information regarding post-publication editorial decisions, whilst also ensuring that the recommended practice is not so involved or restrictive that they become a barrier to adherence to best practice. We do not want the perfect to become the enemy of the good. So the guidelines for the Correc guidelines provide information about metadata transfer and display of work that has been retracted, removed, or has been flagged with an interim or permanent expression of concern. During the development of these guidelines, we've taken into consideration different practices and requirements for different publishers, as well as resource limitations, especially those faced by smaller publishing houses and society journals. Guidance is set up so it very clearly indicates which aspects are considered critical and to ensure transparent communications, as well as which items should be included if they're available and which ones would be ideal if feasible. And so I'm pleased to say that after about 3 years of intense discussions, the Correc recommended practice is now freely available on the NISO website. So I very quickly want to talk about some of the aspects of the Correc guidance that I am most excited about, and that is specifically section 4 through 7. So section 4 provides some information about best practices regarding receipt, display, transfer of metadata elements, and information about which party is involved and responsible for each of these aspects. Section 5 provides some metadata elements that are essential versus which ones are optional, and it also provides guidance both for the retracted or the affected work, as well as the associated editorial notice. The recommended practice also includes examples for metadata sharing, including examples in JATS format and Crossref format. Section 6 has some information about the implementation of these recommended practices, specifically for publishers, for web vendors, and for aggregators. And then my favorite section is Section 7, which talks a little bit about known varieties and complexities we may come across, including but not restricted to articles that have different versions of record, journals that have ceased publishing, and articles that have been published in languages other than English. And so, as you can imagine, there's been a lot of work that has gone into the development of these core recommended practices, but its effectiveness fully depends on the adoption by all of the stakeholders. And therefore, I really appreciate that you've come here to come and listen to me presenting these guidance to you today, and I very much encourage you to talk and share these recommended practices with everyone in your network. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Maria. Now on to our final speaker, who's John Walensky, Professor of Education Emeritus, Stanford University, and founder of the Public Knowledge Project, who's going to introduce the publication facts label.
Thank you very much. I just want to observe that being struck by lightning 7 times has got to be something of an ordeal. I am the 7th speaker, and you've all been very, very patient. I am John Walensky, and I am presenting to you the publication facts label. I just wanted to give a little bit of context. We've seen a great number of presentations in this conference on the integrity question. I would be very alarmed if I was a member of the public and had sat through all of these great concerns about the state of research. And I think we need to take that into account. We're living in an age of misinformation, and trust in science is going down. And at the same time, we're about to open, as it were, the store. We're about to move into a world of entire open access. And so that we could be a counterforce in this world of misinformation is the goal of the publication facts label. And that is that we have a responsibility to educate and to inform the public about why journals are trustworthy. Not that we did all of this work behind the scenes around integrity, but that the journal itself has a different basis for publishing than other forms of information. That we have a different standard and a different set of goals in terms of our work. And the publication facts label is based on presenting to the public, to readers, to new scholars, to editors, what it is that each journal represents as a scholarly publication. The label is based, and I'll just give you a chance to work your way through. There are 11 elements, and I'll explain, well, maybe I'll explain right now how they operate and work. The label is, so I come from the Public Knowledge Project. We develop a platform, a publishing platform that does the work of Silverchair and others, Scholar One, an open source platform, though, that we distribute freely. And it is operating using the technology of the platform to take the data. So the editors and publishers are not involved in gaining this data. It is presented directly from the platform as a source of verification. And it takes advantage of the fact that we have this information real time, so that every article can present a changing average. For example, the articles accepted, days to publication. We also share this information among the users of the label. And again, this is within our own platform at this point, but really I'm asking you to consider whether this is something we shouldn't consider industry-wide. Because the inspiration for this model is the nutrition facts label. And why I was drawn to this model, and this is an American version, but the research on this model showed that it influenced public behavior and public understanding. And that is an unusual bit of social science, to see the public being influenced by a source of scientific information. And that was in the 90s that the research was done, but this came out of the 70s and 80s when the sense of the public's information rights were very prominent around food. And this idea of the public's information rights is something that a space that we want to move into. We want to build public trust in research, open, publicly available research. And I'm hoping that the label can contribute to that. The label will appear on the article landing page and PDFs and other places. It doesn't fit the style of the journal on purpose. It's intended to be across platforms. It is optional. You have to click. It's a pull down, or drop down rather, and so it's not present. We don't expect people to consult it in every article. But when it comes to, for example, a journal you're not familiar with, when you're expanding your horizons in terms of research, when you're looking at research as a global enterprise rather than just a narrow global north activity, the label is intended to be there to provide support. So finally, I just want to give you a last chance to have a look at it and ask you this question about whether this is something that might have the potential. We're developing it now for OJS, for Open Journal Systems. There are 44,000 journals in the world using OJS. It's a very good trial platform, the most widely used in the world. But over the coming year, we'll be coming and knocking on your doors, and industry organizations like Crossref and ORCID, whom we've already been in conversation with, DOAJ, to see whether it isn't time for us to consider our responsibilities to the public in terms of building trust in an information source that I think, at least, is something that is desperately needed at this time. Thank you very much.
Just like to finish up by saying a big thank you to all of our speakers who accepted that challenge to give their update in 5 minutes. So thanks very much, everyone. There's now a 5-minute break to switch rooms, and I've just been asked to let you know that the next session in this room is the role of human editors in an AI world. Thanks very much, everyone.